This presentation is about how the SAT perpetuates systemic discrimination by Silvera, Abderrahmane, and Harshul Singh.
So we're going to begin with a brief history of the SAT first. It was originally designed for the military to test recruits in World War I by Carl Brigham. Brigham was eventually scouted by Harvard to create a scholastic aptitude test for distinguishing scholarship recipients, and from here this test began to be used more broadly across the country. Its first year in use in 1926, it was taken by approximately 8,000 students and is now taken by approximately 2 million and growing. Brigham was a staunch supporter of eugenics, and he used his test as so-called evidence that women, the poor, and ethnic minorities were inferior. Today, the SAT has changed immensely and is no longer used to support eugenics, but there are still elements of prejudice within the test. A 2002 analysis in the Santa Clara Law Review by William C. Kidder and J. Rosner noted clear differential responses between black and white students, with a preference for considering the white student the neutral test taker. For example, a question that was more often answered correctly by white students was considered a benchmark. Though the SAT has long been contested as a mechanism for perpetuating systemic prejudices, there wasn't a lot of research that really detailed the process by which this occurred. So in 2013, Dixon-Roman et al. Generated a model to analyze some of these factors. They used a cohort of approximately 800,000 black and white students who tested in 2003 and generated a structural equation model, SEM, to assess multiple factors such as family income and control for other factors such as high school performance and parental education. On the right here is a structural representation of how these factors were interacting in the model. On the left we have income. There's points for both maternal and paternal education levels, high school achievement, SAT score, of course, and different mechanisms to measure high school achievement. So an SEM model uses mathematical modeling and computation to estimate the relationships between the variables here, which may be measurable and can also be unobservable constructs. Now, looking into the results of this model, there were key components of classism that were found. Some of these findings, detailed by Dixon-Roman et al., include the fact that high school GPA is the most predictive measure overall for performance in the SAT. However, its predictive power decreases with income to the point where its effects are entirely eclipsed in cases of extreme poverty. This implicates the necessity of ubiquitous financial stability for a truly meritocratic educational system. Additionally, there was a correlation of parental education level with SAT score, which potentially represents an intergenerational influence that maintains class hierarchies. The level of education a parent has influences what jobs they can get, how many hours they have to work, and in turn influences how much time they can spend supporting their child in their studies, both personally and financially. Perhaps this is one of the mechanisms by which family income is indirectly affecting SAT performance. Dixon-Roman's model also demonstrated a clear effect of parental income on SAT score, and this can more clearly be seen if you look at the SAT scores as recorded in the National Center for Education Statistics. This table shows scores in different sections in the 2010-11 and 2011-12 academic years. In all sections of the SAT score, there's a fairly linear increase with income. These differences in score, depending on income, are better visualized here in this chart. We see green has the writing score, red mathematics, and blue for critical reading, and all appear to have this increase from bottom to top, where we have the lowest income at the bottom on the y-axis and the greatest income of $200,000 per annum and up at the top. Additionally, there's also an increase in score seen depending on whether you attend a public or private high school, with private high schools having students that score more highly. This highlights the mechanisms through which wealth can influence academic success, where wealthier families can pay the tuition for students to go to private high schools, and this represents the purchasing power in the American education system. In addition to classism, Dixon-Roman's model also identified racial components in the SAT as well. Overall, Black students score lower than white students in all of the income brackets assessed. And there's an even greater increase in test score per GPA point for white students than for Black students as well, which creates greater disparities as GPA increases. Additionally, poverty is more detrimental to the score for Black students, with income nearly 2 times more influential for Black students. For example, if a Black test taker in extreme poverty were to increase their GPA by an entire point, they would still test worse than a middle-income white test taker with a GPA 1 point lower. Additionally, the model predicts that family income is the only exogenous variable which narrows the racial score gap. This means that academic success in high school cannot close the gap between white and Black test takers. The only factor identified in this model capable of doing so was increasing income. Now here is a table generated by Dixon-Roman et al. And again on the left we can see family income, but we can also see the difference in scoring for Black and white test takers. And we can see at levels of extreme poverty, there are instances of nearly 100-point score differences in some of these sections. This difference does appear to narrow as income increases, but there's no evidence that these differentials ever reach zero. Overall, this model demonstrates that race and income are inextricably linked and play a role both directly and indirectly in SAT scoring, making it an inherently unfair method of measuring academic capabilities for college acceptance and perpetuating racism and classism in American academics.
Now we will be moving on to English as a second language students and the challenges with the SAT. Here is a map of the United States, along with the representation of how diverse the states are in terms of ethnicity. College Board issues accommodations. Those students who learn English as a second language were at a distinct disadvantage. To counteract that, in 2016, the College Board finally issued several adjustments for ESL learners. However, many agree it was not enough. It was only available for candidates who sit for a state-funded SAT during the school day in certain states. This had its own complications because all 3 of the above conditions had to be met by the student. It was also difficult to accommodate such a diverse group of students, as some of these ESL students would be more accommodated to the English language than others, and some would be completely new to the English language. Is math a universal language? It is assumed that immigrant students are adept in mathematics, although they may have had limited access. While it may be considered a universal language among students, even math is very much not. For these ESL students, extra time and a glossary of translated words is granted for math word problems. This is not enough for the students, as shown in the practice problems of the next slide. Here is an example of a math word problem given to Japanese students studying in America. As you can see, this problem would be given in this format, and if the student did not know the Japanese words given, they would be given a small glossary of words that would be translated to the English language, which would help them. This is the same math word problem given in English now. Key takeaways from this are that cognitive academic language proficiency is necessary for achievement in math content areas. Many English language learners may have knowledge that they cannot express. This in turn can lead to excess stress and self-esteem issues, because even if you struggle with Japanese, it doesn't mean you don't have the ability to do math. Also, most importantly, math is not universal among all languages. Some things need to be understood about standard accommodations. The testing agencies use the same supports that are used in class or for other assessments. The most standard adjustment given is simply a 50% extended time period for the test, and this change is only temporary. Unique requests for adjustments must be submitted 4 weeks before the testing date of the student. This can be very problematic. Educational quality needs to improve. There needs to be better minority representation and standardized testing scores. Radical change in educational quality is needed, something along the lines of events from the 1960s. African Americans in the Black Panther Party started a free breakfast for children program because they knew children who did not start the day on full stomachs were less attentive in classes. This would directly bring positive results to the students, and this paved the way for more reform in the future.
The inequality in the SAT was addressed by the College Board and other institutions after many criticisms of its system, and since more awareness was raised about how race and socioeconomic status can affect the SAT scores. The College Board had been working these last few years on finding a way to measure students' disadvantage level, and came up with the Adversity Index, announcing and expanding it in 2019. It is very similar to affirmative action, and it is a way of giving colleges context about the student situations that could affect their academic accomplishment, so that the college admission officers recruit more disadvantaged students. The Adversity Index measures 15 factors, the biggest ones being those that affect the neighborhood environment, family environment, and high school environment. It used to be called the Environmental Context Dashboard in its early development stages. The Adversity Index has a notion of privilege in its name due to the mention of adversity, and shows that the College Board is taking more steps into addressing inequality problems within the college admission process, focusing more on meritocracy rather than things like legacy students. This is an example of what the Adversity Index looks like. It uses public data as well as information submitted by its students to give them a disadvantage score from 100 to 0. 100 being that they had no hardships, and 0 being that they faced a lot of obstacles. However, students cannot see this score, and it is not obligatory for colleges to consider it. The Adversity Index still has a lot of critics, one of them being the ACT itself. The CEO of ACT has come out against the adversity score, criticizing it among others for its lack of transparency and reliability, especially due to the fact that students could not see the score and that they could self-report information with a polling source. Other problems are that it does not address the students' individual challenges like the loss of a loved one or sickness, and it just regurgitates information that can be found in high school profile reports. Moreover, only 14% of American admission officers support it, and an even smaller fraction, 3%, wants to use it, which highlights its unreliability and the public's trust in it. It also brings more confusion and distrust in the college admission process, and can be manipulated by students to their advantage by faking information like a low family income, for example. The Adversity Index has also been called a PR student by its critics due to the fact that its influence on the actual admission process isn't clear. After all this criticism, the College Board is in the process of making changes to the Adversity Index in order to address its flaws. First of all, the College Board is changing the name of its disadvantage score from Adversity Index to Landscape. It should start providing information of both of the student's high school and neighborhood, instead of merging the data. Addressing one of the biggest problems with diversity score, the College Board is finally going to let students see their score in an effort of providing more transparency. However, these changes are still in process and also don't address all of the issues yet. One of them being that admission officers don't have data about 25% of applicants to schools.
Some steps are being taken in the right direction. Many universities across the country are not requiring the SAT or the ACT now. More than 1,230 schools have made it optional, including UCs. However, it puts students that do not have standardized testing scores at a distinct disadvantage.